Here, 12 hackers broke his system. The Arab billionaire panicked until a poor girl typed 3 lines. Before we continue, comment which city you're watching from. The Iron Vault was supposed to be impenetrable. Prince Malik Al Fayed had spent $400 million making sure of it. The data center sat 200 feet underground in the middle of the Arabian desert, protected by layers of steel, concrete, and the most sophisticated cybersecurity money could buy. It held the private keys for half the region's digital banking infrastructure, $200 billion in assets, the financial heartbeat of an entire economy. At 2 a.m., every screen in the command center turned blood red. Malik stood frozen in the center of the room, his tailored Brioni suit suddenly feeling too tight around his chest. The main display, a 100-foot wall of monitors that normally showed orderly streams of green code, now pulsed with a single image, a skull, laughing, and beneath it, a countdown timer that made his blood run cold. Row 59. 58 minutes until everything disappeared. "They're inside the kernel!" David Ross screamed from his station, his fingers flying across keyboards that weren't responding the way they should. Ross was the lead cybersecurity officer, poached from the NSA for $50,000 a month. Right now, he looked like a man watching his career dissolve in real time. "It's a Hydra attack. Every time I patch a breach, 2 more open up." The reference wasn't lost on Malik, the mythological monster that grew 2 heads for everyone you cut off. He watched the secondary monitors as Ross's team threw countermeasures at the intrusion. Firewalls activated, decoys deployed, emergency protocols engaged. Nothing worked. The virus was alive, adapting, learning. "Who are they?" Malik's voice came out quieter than he intended, but everyone in the room heard it. The air conditioning hummed. Someone's keyboard clattered desperately. The countdown ticked. 57:43. "We've identified 12 distinct signatures," Ross said, his voice cracking with panic. He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the room being cooled to 68 degrees. 12 of the world's best black hat hackers working in perfect coordination? Russian, Chinese, Nigerian, Brazilian? They're synchronized like a surgical team? Malik stepped closer to the screen. "What do they want? Ransom?" "Worse." Ross pulled up a diagnostic that showed encryption algorithms spreading like cancer through the system. "They're not stealing the money, sir. They're encrypting it. In 57 minutes, the encryption key deletes itself. Every account, every transaction record, every private key, gone, locked forever, 0 access." The number hit Malik like a physical blow. $200 billion. Not stolen, just erased, inaccessible. Every pension fund, every corporate account, every government reserve that relied on his infrastructure would vanish into digital oblivion. The economic collapse would be catastrophic. His name would become synonymous with the greatest financial disaster in modern history. "Cut the power," Malik ordered, his voice sharp with desperation. "Shut down everything. Pull the physical plug if you have to." Ross spun in his chair, his eyes wide. "We can't, sir. The virus has overridden the physical breakers. It's locked us out of the emergency shutdown systems. And if we manually pull the cables, the power surge will fry every hard drive in the facility. The data won't be encrypted. It'll be destroyed, melted." Around the command center, the rest of Ross's team worked in frantic silence, 5 experts, every one of them holding advanced degrees from Stanford, Oxford, MIT. Every one of them earning salaries that would make most people weep. Dr. Sarah Chen, the quantum encryption specialist, hadn't looked up from her screen in 20 minutes. Marcus Webb, the penetration testing expert who'd once broken into the Pentagon systems just to prove he could, was typing so fast his fingers blurred. Andrei Volkov, formerly of Russia's FSB cyber division, was speaking rapid Russian into his headset, calling contacts in the dark web underworld. None of it was working. Row 5422. "We're hostages in our own building," Ross said quietly, the reality settling over him like ash. "They've turned our own defenses against us. The more we fight, the deeper they dig in." Malik walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the underground facility. Below him, rows of servers blinked with activity that was now corrupted, poisoned. Each rack cost more than a luxury car. The cooling systems alone ran $2 million a year to operate, And all of it, every wire and circuit and processor, was now controlled by 12 people he'd never met. People who were probably sitting in basement apartments on the other side of the world, drinking coffee and destroying his empire with nothing more than keyboards and internet connections. The irony burned. Malik commanded respect from Dubai to Singapore. He had dinner with presidents and prime ministers. He could move markets with a single phone call, but right now he couldn't protect the one thing that mattered most. The firewalls? Malik asked, grasping for solutions. They're eating them, Dr. Chen said without looking up. Her voice was flat, defeated. The virus is using our own processing power to overwhelm every defense we deploy. It's like trying to fight fire with gasoline. 005208. Brute force decryption? Would take 10,000 years with our current computing capacity, Marcus Webb said, his Australian accent thick with frustration. They're using quantum-resistant algorithms, military grade, maybe better. Call the manufacturers, get the backdoor codes. Already tried. Ross gestured at his phone. They're in Switzerland. It's the middle of the night, and even if we reach them, the security protocols require 48 hours of verification before they release root access codes. We have 51 minutes. Malik's jaw tightened. In the reflection of the window, he could see his own face, 38 years old. Heir to one of the Middle East's largest oil fortunes, builder of a technology empire that spanned 3 continents, and utterly, completely powerless. The skull on the screen laughed silently. Year 45035. Sir, Andrei Volkov's voice cut through the tension. I just got word from my contacts. This isn't random. This is the Zodiac Collective. They've been dormant for 2 years. This is their comeback operation. The name meant nothing to most people, but everyone in the cybersecurity world knew the Zodiac Collective. 12 hackers who'd never been caught, never been identified. They'd crashed stock exchanges for fun, exposed government secrets just to prove they could. Then they'd vanished, and the world had hoped they were gone for good. What do they want? Malik asked. Nothing, Volkov said. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't want money or political leverage. They want to prove that no system is unbreakable, that wealth and power mean nothing against pure skill. Malik turned from the window. Then we give them what they want. We admit defeat. We negotiate. Ross shook his head. There's no communication channel. They didn't leave a number or email. They're not interested in talking. They're interested in watching us fail. Euro 4817. The command center smelled like fear and desperation now. Expensive cologne mixed with sweat. The coffee in the corner had gone cold hours ago. Outside this underground fortress, the desert night was cool and peaceful. Stars probably shone clear in the unpolluted sky. But down here, in this $400 million tomb, the only thing shining was the countdown timer, and it was getting smaller. Malik sank into his chair, the leather squeaking under him. He'd built his reputation on being 3 steps ahead, on anticipating problems before they emerged, on having solutions ready before questions were even asked. Now he was watching everything crumble in real time, and for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely no idea what to do. Keep trying, he said quietly. Everything you can think of, every backdoor, every exploit, every desperate measure. We have 47 minutes to save an economy. The team bent back to their keyboards. The clicking intensified. The skull kept laughing, and somewhere far above them, in a utility closet where the cleaning staff stored their equipment, a small girl named Nara was listening to the sound of servers that were screaming for help. Nara was 12 years old, and she had learned a long time ago that invisibility was a survival skill. Her mother, Fatima, cleaned the Iron Vault's floors every night for minimum wage. 6 days a week, 10-hour shifts, scrubbing the marble hallways and server rooms where men in expensive suits made decisions about billions of dollars. Fatima didn't speak much English, and the men who walked past her rarely looked down. To them she was furniture, a mop and bucket that happened to breathe. Nara came with her most nights because there was nowhere else to go. Foster care had been a disaster. The group home had been worse. So she hid in the utility closet during her mother's shift, waiting in the darkness among cleaning supplies that smelled like bleach and industrial soap, doing homework by the light of a phone screen. But homework wasn't what kept Nara awake. Code was what kept her awake. While other 12-year-olds were watching videos and playing games, Nara was teaching herself programming languages. She'd learned to read by stealing discarded coding manuals from the trash bins outside the facility. Technical documentation that the engineers threw away when software updated, security protocols that were outdated but still taught her the fundamental logic of how systems thought. Her first computer had been a broken laptop she'd found in a dumpster behind an electronics repair shop. The screen was cracked, the battery was dead, half the keys didn't work. But Nara had salvaged parts from a microwave someone had thrown out, rewired the power supply, and brought it back to life. It took her 3 weeks. She was 9 years old. Now, she didn't see code the way normal people did. She didn't see text on a screen. She saw architecture, data streams were water pipes in the slum where she lived with her mother. She understood where pressure built up, where leaks formed, where the flow could be redirected. Firewalls were doors, encryption was locks. Networks were neighborhoods where information lived and traveled. The engineers who worked above her head had degrees and certifications and salaries that could buy cars. Nara had a broken laptop and trash manuals and a mind that understood systems the way some people understood music. Tonight felt different. She'd been sitting in the utility closet for 2 hours, listening to the usual hum of the servers through the thin walls. The Iron Vault's machines had a rhythm, a steady electronic heartbeat that never changed, but around midnight, the rhythm had shifted. The hum had become higher-pitched, stressed, and then, about 20 minutes ago, everything had changed completely. The servers were screaming, not literally, but Nara could feel it through the floor. The vibration was wrong, frantic, like the building's entire nervous system was firing in panic. She stood up from her corner, pressing her ear against the wall. Through the metal and concrete, she could hear raised voices, commands being shouted, the electronic shriek of alarm systems. Something was very, very wrong. Nara knew she should stay hidden, should wait for her mother's shift to end, should be invisible like always. But her mind was already working on the problem, analyzing the patterns she was hearing, the frequency of the server vibrations, the urgency in the voices, the way the building's environmental systems were behaving. She opened the utility closet door and stepped into the corridor. The hallway was empty, sterile white walls, LED lighting that never flickered, security cameras in every corner. Nara had mapped out their blind spots months ago. She moved quickly, her worn sneakers silent on the polished floor. Her clothes were faded, a t-shirt with patches on the elbows and jeans that were too short because she'd grown 3 inches this year and there was no money for new ones. She followed the sound of crisis. Down 2 corridors, past the break room, where her mother sometimes sat alone during her 15-minute lunch, through a maintenance access door that was supposed to be locked but never quite latched properly, and then she was standing outside the command center, listening through the door at the desperation happening inside. Every patch creates 2 more breaches. 47 minutes? We're hostages in our own building. Nara's analytical mind processed the fragments of conversation. Cyber attack. Sophisticated. The experts were failing. She could hear it in their voices, the kind of panic that came when people who were supposed to have all the answers suddenly had none. She shouldn't go in there. She was the cleaner's daughter, a nobody, a child who wasn't supposed to exist in this world of billion-dollar infrastructure and security clearances. But her hand was already on the door handle, because Nara had learned something from years of being invisible. Sometimes being overlooked was the biggest advantage you could have. She pushed the door open and walked inside. The command center was chaos wrapped in expensive technology. 6 people clustered around workstations, their faces illuminated by screens that pulsed red with warnings. The massive display wall showed that laughing skull and the countdown that had just ticked below 45 minutes. The air smelled like coffee and sweat and the particular kind of fear that came when everything you'd built was about to collapse. Nobody noticed Nara for almost 30 seconds. She stood just inside the doorway, taking in the scene with the analytical detachment she'd learned from years of observing systems. The experts were fighting the wrong battle. She could see it in how they were approaching the problem, attacking symptoms instead of causes, treating the infection instead of finding the source. Her eyes moved to the environmental displays on the side monitors, temperature readings, humidity sensors, power consumption metrics, the kind of data that most people ignored because it seemed irrelevant to security breaches. That's where the real story was. "You're fighting the reflection," Nara said quietly. David Ross spun in his chair so fast he nearly knocked over his cold coffee. His eyes went wide when he saw her, a small girl in worn clothes, standing in the most secure room in the facility like she belonged there. "What the—" Ross started, but Nara kept talking, her voice calm and clear. "The real attack is coming through the cooling system sensors." The room went silent except for the electronic hum of dying security protocols and the countdown timer that now read 00:44:38. "Security!" Rossi shouted, finding his voice. "Get this cleaner's kid out of here. How did she even—" "Wait!" Prince Malik's voice cut through the panic. He'd been standing by the windows, watching his empire crumble, but something about the girl's tone made him pause. She didn't sound like a lost child. She sounded like someone who'd identified a problem. "What did you say?" Nara didn't move toward them, didn't approach the workstations or touch anything. She just pointed at the environmental monitoring display on the far wall. "Look at the power usage," she said. "The CPU usage is only at 40%, but the temperature is climbing. Your processors aren't working harder, but your cooling systems think they are. That's not a software attack. That's a hardware manipulation." Dr. Sarah Chen's fingers froze on her keyboard. She looked at the display Nara was indicating. Her face went pale. "The hackers aren't attacking your code directly," Nara continued, her young voice carrying the confidence of someone who understood systems from the inside out. "They hacked the thermostat. They're tricking the computer into thinking it's overheating, so the safety protocols are opening vent ports to cool down. But those vent ports are also data channels. You're building walls at the front door while they're crawling in through the air conditioning." Ross's mouth opened, then closed. His professional pride was at war with the dawning realization that this child might be right. That's impossible. The thermostat is on an analog circuit. It can't be hacked remotely." Nara's expression didn't change. Matter of fact, no superiority, just stating reality. Everything is digital if it has a sensor, and every sensor can be fed false information if you know how to speak its language. Malik took a step closer, studying the girl with new intensity. Her clothes were obviously secondhand, her hair needed washing, but her eyes were sharp, analytical, the eyes of someone who saw patterns where others saw only chaos. "Check the thermostat logs," he ordered Ross. Ross hesitated, then typed the command. His screen filled with data, temperature sensor readings, voltage fluctuations, communication packets that shouldn't exist between the HVAC system and the network architecture. The color drained from his face. "She's right," he whispered. "The temperature sensors are broadcasting false readings. They're sending data packets through the HVAC controller. It's using protocols from the 1990s that our modern security systems don't even monitor because we assumed they were isolated." Marcus Webb was already pulling up additional diagnostics. "The attack vector is routing through the environmental management system. They're using the cooling infrastructure as a Trojan horse. Every time we deploy a firewall at the network level, they just tunnel through the physical plant systems." Nara watched them discover what she'd identified in 30 seconds. She'd spent years learning to see what others missed because her survival had depended on finding opportunities in places people overlooked. Were 43:12. The countdown kept ticking. "Fix it!" Malik's voice cracked with desperation. "If you know where the attack is coming from, shut it down." Ross was already typing, but his fingers were shaking. I don't know how. The HVAC system uses legacy code from the 1990s. We don't speak that language anymore. We're trained in modern cloud architecture, Python, current security protocols. This is assembly-level programming that hasn't been used in decades." The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that happened when highly paid experts realized their expensive education had left them unprepared for a problem that required outdated knowledge. 42:47. Nara stepped forward, just one step, enough to make her presence impossible to ignore. "I know the language," she said. "I learned it from the manuals you threw in the garbage 3 years ago." The statement hung in the air like an accusation and an offer at the same time. Ross let out a sound that was half laugh, half hysteria. You? You're a child? You're going to outcode 12 elite hackers who've been planning this attack for months? Nara met his eyes without flinching. I'm not going to outcode them, she said, her voice steady. I'm going to suffocate them. Malik stared at the countdown timer, 1:42 through 3, then at the girl standing in his command center with mud on her shoes and conviction in her eyes, then at his team of experts who couldn't solve a problem that was bleeding his fortune dry at a rate of $3.5 billion per minute. The math was brutal and simple. What do you need? He asked Nara. The main terminal, she said, gesturing toward the command station where Ross sat frozen. And everyone needs to step back. These systems detect multiple user inputs as security threats. If I'm going to work, I work alone. Ross looked at Malik like he'd lost his mind. Sir, you cannot seriously be considering... I'm considering that we have 41 minutes until economic collapse, Malik interrupted, his voice sharp. And your team of 5 experts with their advanced degrees hasn't slowed this attack by a single second. So yes, Marcus, I'm seriously considering letting a 12-year-old try what you cannot. The words landed like a slap. Ross's face flushed red, but he couldn't argue with the truth bleeding across every monitor in the room. 04028. If you save this system, Malik said, turning back to Nara, his voice dropping to something quieter, more desperate, I will give you anything. Name it. Anything you want. Nara didn't hesitate. Her answer came instant and precise, like she'd been thinking about it for years. $50 million, she said, for the Al-Zatari refugee camp to build a school and a hospital. The number hung in the air. $50 million. More money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, requested not for herself, but for strangers living in tents on the Syrian-Jordanian border. Malik studied her face. No greed, no calculation about what that money could buy for a girl who wore secondhand clothes and slept in utility closets, just a clear-eyed assessment of what was fair payment for saving $200 billion. Done, Malik said. Give her the chair. Ross stood slowly, his movements stiff with wounded pride and lingering disbelief. Nara walked past him to the main terminal. The chair was massive, designed for adults. When she sat down, her feet didn't touch the ground. She looked tiny, absurd, a child playing at being a cybersecurity expert, but her hands moved over the keyboard with practiced confidence. She cracked her knuckles once, then her fingers found the keys, and everything changed. War 039. 12 Nara didn't start with the main attack. She started with reconnaissance, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she pulled up system architecture maps, legacy code repositories, and environmental control interfaces that Ross's team had ignored. The Zodiac Collective is good, she murmured, more to herself than the watching adults. They've layered their attack through multiple vectors. The HVAC infiltration is elegant, but it's also the weak point. They had to use old protocols to access it, which means they're operating in a language most modern security systems don't speak. Dr. Chen leaned forward despite herself, professional curiosity overriding skepticism. You're saying their sophistication is also their vulnerability? Exactly. Nara's eyes never left the screen. They're brilliant, but they assumed nobody would recognize 1990s assembly code anymore. That assumption is their mistake. She opened a command terminal. The black screen with its blinking green cursor looked primitive compared to the modern interfaces surrounding it, but Nara's hands moved across it like a pianist who'd finally found their instrument. Euro 3745? Then the screen exploded with warnings. Access denied, admin override, initiated by hostiles, polymorphic worm deployed. They see you, Ross shouted from behind her. They know someone's trying to counter them. They just deployed a polymorphic worm. It's rewriting the code as you type it. You can't beat them if they're literally changing the rules in real time. Nara's fingers paused for exactly 2 seconds. Then she leaned back slightly, her young face showing calculation instead of fear. They're fast, she said, her voice steady despite the red warnings flooding the screen. They're reacting to my keystrokes in milliseconds, pattern recognition algorithms watching everything I type. so I have to stop typing code they can recognize. Her hands returned to the keyboard, but now the commands she entered looked different. Not the structured syntax of modern programming languages, not even the assembly code she'd mentioned, just raw numbers, binary, ones and zeros flowing across the screen in patterns that looked like digital poetry. "What is she doing?" Malik whispered. Marcus Webb's eyes went wide. She's talking directly to the processor. She's bypassing the operating system entirely, speaking in machine language that the virus can't intercept because it exists at a layer below where the worm operates. "I didn't know that was possible," Dr. Chen breathed. "It's not supposed to be possible," Webb replied. "You'd need to understand processor architecture at the silicon level, the kind of knowledge that takes decades to—" "She's 12, Ross interrupted, his voice hollow. On screen, Nara's binary commands were creating pathways through the system that hadn't existed before, direct channels to hardware that the Zodiac Collective's sophisticated software couldn't touch because software couldn't see what was happening at the physical layer. Froyanchor Doior 3522. The temperature readings started to shift. Nara was taking control of the environmental systems, but carefully, incrementally, hiding her movements in the noise of the ongoing attack. Then everything went wrong. The room turned red, emergency sirens blared, system critical cooling failure, meltdown imminent. "They cut the fans," Ross screamed, his panic returning. "They detected what you were doing, and they're countering by forcing a physical meltdown. They're going to literally melt the servers to stop you." Temperature gauges on the wall displays started climbing. Fast. 72 degrees, 75 degrees, 78 degrees. "We have to abort." Ross was already moving toward emergency shutdown protocols. "If the temperature hits 100 degrees, the processors will fry. We'll lose everything, not just the money, but the hardware itself. This entire facility will be scrap metal." "No." Nara's voice was quiet but absolute. Her hands never left the keyboard. 82 degrees, 85 degrees, 88 degrees. "They want us to panic and shut down," Nara explained, her focus never wavering from the screen. "If we shut down, the encryption key executes immediately. They win. But if I can make them think they've already won, they'll stop attacking for just a moment, and that moment is all I need." Malik gripped the back of her chair. "What are you saying?" 90 degrees, 93 degrees, 95 degrees. "I'm saying I'm going to let the temperature climb to 98 degrees, critical threshold. They'll think the meltdown is inevitable. They'll stop their active attacks to watch us burn. That's when I strike." "That's insane," Ross's voice cracked. "At 98 degrees, we're 1 degree from permanent hardware damage." "Trust me," Nara said. 95 degrees, 96 degrees, 97 degrees. The room fell silent except for the screaming alarms and the desperate hum of dying cooling systems. Every person in the command center held their breath. Malik's knuckles were white on the leather chair. Dr. Chen had stopped pretending to work at her station and was just staring at the temperature gauge climbing toward catastrophe. 97.5 degrees. 97.8 degrees. Uo.3215. 98 degrees. And suddenly, the attack patterns on the monitors changed. The aggressive probing stopped. The Zodiac Collective's assault became passive. Watching, waiting for the inevitable meltdown that would destroy the very thing they'd tried to encrypt. "Now," Nara whispered. "They're listening now." Her hands flew across the keyboard with speed that seemed impossible for someone her size. Not typing paragraphs of code, not writing elaborate programs, just 3 lines, 3 specific commands in archaic assembly language that hadn't been used since before she was born. Set sensor input, Geitschash loop true. "Line 1, Nara said, her voice steady as she worked, "creates an infinite feedback loop. The hackers think they're attacking the real system, but I just redirected them into a mirror image. A phantom server that looks identical to the real one. They're fighting themselves now. Every attack they launch just damages the reflection. Redirect port 880, Bior Dev null. Line 2, Their virus is still active in the real system, but I just opened a black hole, a null device that consumes data without processing it. Their polymorphic worm is now writing itself into nothing, deleting itself by trying to adapt to an environment that doesn't exist. Execute purge target external IP. Nara's finger hovered over the enter key. The countdown timer read Euro 3147. Temperature was holding at 98 degrees. The entire room waited. Line 3, she said quietly, sends a feedback spike back through their connection. They came in through the HVAC sensors, so they're still connected to that ancient analog system, and analog systems don't have surge protection. This is going to fry every piece of hardware they're using to attack us. She pressed enter. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the main display flickered. The skull icon glitched, pixelated, started to fragment. On the network monitors, the 12 distinct attack signatures that had been coordinating so perfectly suddenly went chaotic. Error messages cascaded across multiple screens, connection failures, hardware malfunctions, 12 different locations around the world experiencing simultaneous electrical surges that turned expensive computers into melted plastic and smoking circuits. The skull shattered. Access granted system. Secure threat eliminated. The countdown timer stopped. Nuryozo 412, 4 minutes and 12 seconds before $200 billion disappeared forever. The alarms cut off, the emergency lighting faded, the temperature started dropping as cooling systems came back online, and across every monitor in the command center, green code began flowing again. Orderly, clean, safe. Nara leaned back in the massive chair, her small chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She wiped her hands on her jeans like she'd just finished a simple homework assignment instead of saving an economy. The room was dead silent. Then Dr. Sarah Chen started clapping, slow at first, then faster. Marcus Webb joined her, Andrei Volkov. One by one, the experts who had failed for hours watched a 12-year-old girl succeed in minutes, and they couldn't do anything but acknowledge the impossible thing they'd just witnessed. Ross didn't clap. He just stared at his screen where diagnostic reports were confirming what everyone already knew. The Zodiac Collective's attack had been completely neutralized, their hardware was destroyed, and the Iron Vault systems were secure. Malik walked around the chair to look at Nara directly. His hands were shaking. His empire had just teetered on the edge of collapse and been saved by someone he'd never met, someone his security systems weren't designed to see, someone the world had decided didn't matter. "You used legacy code to beat modern hackers," he said quietly. "You turned their sophistication against them, and you did it with 3 lines. Nara looked up at him, her blue eyes meeting his without fear or pride, just matter-of-fact acknowledgement of reality. "Systems are easy," she said, sliding out of the chair and picking up her worn backpack from where she'd dropped it by the door. "People are hard." Nara didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just stood up from the chair, adjusted the straps on her backpack, and started walking toward the door like she'd just finished another night waiting for her mother's cleaning shift to end. "Wait." Malik's voice stopped her mid-step. "Where are you going?" "Home," Nara said simply. "The attack is over, you're safe. The $50 million goes to Al-Zatari camp like we agreed." Malik moved between her and the door, his mind racing. He hadn't built a fortune by letting extraordinary opportunities walk away. "You saved $200 billion, you did what 5 experts with advanced degrees couldn't do? You can't just leave?" Nara tilted her head, studying him with those analytical eyes that saw through expensive suits to the calculations underneath. "Why not?" "Because..." Malik gestured around the command center at the banks of monitors, the sophisticated equipment, the infrastructure that represented cutting-edge technology. "Because you belong here, not hiding in utility closets, not cleaning floors with your mother. You just demonstrated abilities that most people spend 20 years in universities trying to develop." He took a breath, making the decision. "I want you to run this department. I'll pay you whatever you want. Full authority over cybersecurity operations. Access to resources that..." "No," Nara interrupted. The word landed flat and final. Ross, still at his workstation, looked up in shock. Dr. Chen stopped gathering her equipment. The idea that someone would refuse Prince Malik Al-Fayed, especially someone with nothing, seemed impossible. "No," Malik repeated, genuine confusion in his voice. "You don't understand. I'm offering you everything. Education, position, security. A life where you never have to worry about—" "I understand exactly what you're offering," Nara said, her voice calm but carrying an edge now. "And I'm saying no because you don't understand what just happened here. Tonight." She turned to face him fully. This 12-year-old girl looking up at a billionaire prince and speaking truth that nobody else in his life would dare to say. "You're arrogant," she said. "You spent $400 million building a fortress, but you were beaten by 12 people in basements because you assumed that money equals security. You hired experts based on their degrees instead of their thinking. You ignored the cooling ducts because they were dirty and mechanical and beneath your attention." Her voice didn't rise, but everyone in the room felt the weight of her words. "And you ignored me because I'm poor, because I'm the cleaner's daughter, because I don't fit your idea of what intelligence looks like." Malik's jaw tightened. The truth cut deep because it was accurate. He had built his empire by recognizing value, but tonight had proven he'd been looking in all the wrong places. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "Everything you just said is true, which is exactly why I need someone like you here, to change how we think, to see what we're missing." Nara shook her head. "You don't need me. You need to change your entire system. One person with non-traditional intelligence working for a traditional institution doesn't create change. It just makes you feel progressive while everything stays the same." "Then what do you want?" Malik asked, spreading his hands. "Tell me how to make this right." Nara's expression was unreadable for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of something she'd been thinking about for far longer than just tonight. "I want you to fire them," she said, pointing at Ross and his team of experts. "All of them." The room went completely silent. Ross's face turned white, then red. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," Nara continued, her eyes never leaving Malik's. "They failed tonight not because they're stupid, but because they've been trained to think inside boxes. They speak the same languages, use the same tools, see the same solutions. That's why the Zodiac Collective beat them so easily." She walked closer to Malik, her small frame somehow commanding the entire space. "I want to hire a new team. Kids from Al-Zatari refugee camp and others like it. Kids who learn to code on broken cell phones because they couldn't afford computers. Kids who understand systems because they've had to survive in broken ones their entire lives. Kids who can see solutions that your expensive experts never will because they think differently." Marcus Webb spoke up, his Australian accent sharp with offense. "You're saying street kids can do our jobs better than professionals with decades of experience?" "I'm saying they already did," Nara replied, her voice matter of fact. "I beat 12 of the world's best hackers tonight using knowledge I learned from manuals you threw in the garbage. So yes, I'm absolutely saying that kids who've had to innovate to survive can outthink people who've only ever worked in air-conditioned offices with unlimited budgets." Dr. Chen was shaking her head slowly. "Even if that's true, you can't just replace an entire cybersecurity team with untrained children. The liability, the security clearances, the excuses," Nara finished. "Right, that's all I'm hearing. Excuses about why we have to keep doing things the way they've always been done, even though tonight proved that way doesn't work." Malik was quiet, his business mind working through the implications. Everything Nara was saying challenged fundamental assumptions about how institutions operated, about who deserved opportunities and why, about where intelligence actually lived and how to find it. "You said kids from the camps," he said slowly. "How many are we talking about?" "To start, 20. Nara's answer came immediate and specific. 20 kids between ages 10 and 17 who I've already identified through online coding forums and dark web communication channels. Kids who've been solving problems you don't even know exist." "They're children," Ross protested weakly. "So am I," Nara shot back. "And I just saved your employer $200 billion. Age isn't the problem. Your assumptions about age are the problem." Malik walked to the window, looking down at the underground facility that represented his attempt to buy security through technology and expertise. Below him, servers hummed peacefully now. Safe. Because a homeless child had seen what his expensive team couldn't? What would this new team do? He asked. What would their role be? Everything your current team does, but better, Nara said. Threat assessment, system architecture, security protocols. But they'd also do something your team never could. They'd anticipate attacks from people who think like they do. People who've been locked out of traditional systems and found creative ways around them. You can't defend against unconventional thinking using conventional methods? She paused, then added with perfect timing, Tonight proved that. Malik turned back to face her. And you would lead this team? No, Nara said firmly. I'm 12. I should be in school, not running a department. But I would consult. I would help you find the right people and make sure they have what they need. And I would make sure you don't turn them into another version of what you already have. Malik searched for words. That's not how corporations work. We have structures, hierarchies, proven methods. That failed catastrophically tonight, Nara reminded him. Maybe it's time to try something different. The challenge hung in the air between them. Behind Malik, his team of experts stood silent, their careers hanging in the balance. Behind Nara, the door to the utility closets and minimum wage floors represented the world she'd come from. There's one more thing, Nara said, a small smile finally touching her lips. The kids I'm talking about? They're already here. They were monitoring the attack from outside. When I realized what the Zodiac Collective was doing, I sent them the signature patterns. They've been tracking the hackers' movements for the last hour, confirming my analysis, and they're ready to start work tomorrow if you agree. Ross made a choking sound. You had street kids hacking into our systems while we were under attack? They weren't hacking in, Nara corrected. They were watching the digital footprints the attackers left in public-facing networks, the kind of data your team ignored because you were too focused on your internal systems to see the external patterns. Malik stared at her. This child had not only solved his crisis, but had come prepared with a complete alternative to his entire security structure. She'd been several steps ahead from the moment she walked through the door. Why should I trust them? He asked. Why should I trust you? Because we have nothing to lose, Nara said simply. People with nothing to lose take risks. They innovate. They find solutions that people worried about protecting their positions never will. Your experts failed tonight because they were afraid of being wrong, afraid of trying something unconventional, afraid of losing their status. She looked around at the luxurious command center, the expensive equipment, the trappings of wealth that had proven useless when it mattered most. We're not afraid, she continued. We can't afford to be. And that's what makes us dangerous to people who want to hurt you, because we think like they do, but we're on your side. The silence stretched. Malik was a man who made billion-dollar decisions, but this one felt different, heavier. This wasn't just about money or security. This was about admitting that everything he'd built his philosophy on might be wrong. He looked at Ross, at the team that had served him faithfully, if ineffectively, then back at Nara, who had saved everything while asking for nothing for herself. He extended his hand. Deal, he said. Bring me your team tomorrow. We'll start the transition. Nara took his hand. Her grip was firm despite her small size. They're not my team, she corrected one last time. They're yours. I'm just showing you how to see them. 6 years later, the Iron Vault didn't exist anymore. The sign outside now read Oasis Node in both English and Arabic. The underground facility that had once been Prince Malik Al Fayed's private fortress had transformed into something unprecedented. The most secure digital infrastructure on Earth, protecting not just his assets, but the financial systems of 23 countries across 3 continents. But walking through its corridors, you'd never know it was a corporate command center. The staff wore hoodies and hijabs and jeans. They spoke in a dozen different dialects, switching between Arabic, English, Somali, Kurdish, and languages that didn't have official names because the speakers came from places maps had forgotten. Some worked barefoot because shoes felt restrictive. Others kept prayer rugs beside their workstations. The break room smelled like cardamom coffee and Ethiopian injera bread instead of catered corporate sandwiches. and they were brilliant. Nara Al-Fayed, she'd taken Malik's surname after he formally adopted her when she was 14, stood in the main command center watching her team work. At 18, she was the youngest chief technology officer in Fortune 500 history. Her face had appeared on the covers of Wired, Time, and Forbes. Universities competed to offer her honorary degrees that she politely declined because, as she told one interviewer, credentials didn't make me capable, experience did. Today, she was showing a delegation of visiting prime ministers and technology ministers from the European Union around the facility. They'd come to understand how Oasis Node had become virtually impenetrable while traditional institutions continued falling to cyber attacks weekly. The key, Nara explained as they walked past workstations where teenagers were monitoring global threat patterns, is that we don't think like institutions. We think like attackers, because most of us were attackers once. People locked out of systems, finding creative ways in. One of the ministers, a woman from Germany with 3 advanced degrees in computer science, looked skeptical. You're saying your security team is composed primarily of former hackers? I'm saying our team is composed of people who understand what it means to be invisible, Nara corrected. People who've had to survive by seeing what others miss. That perspective is more valuable than any certification program. They stopped at a corner office where Khalid, 16, was leading a threat assessment meeting. He'd grown up in Al-Zatari refugee camp, teaching himself to code on a phone he'd repaired using parts from 3 different broken devices. Now he was explaining to a room of adults why their proposed security protocol had 7 critical vulnerabilities. He has no formal education, the German minister observed. He has the best education possible, Malik said, joining the tour. Necessity. The same teacher that trained Nara. The prince looked different than he had 6 years ago. His suits were less expensive, his manner less formal. He'd learned to listen more than he spoke, especially when people half his age explained things he didn't understand. The numbers tell the story better than I can, Malik continued, leading them to a conference room where data visualization showed Oasis Node's impact. In 6 years, we've had 0 successful breaches. 0. During that same period, traditional financial institutions reported an average of 47 major attacks per year. He clicked to the next slide. The Harper Foundation, renamed after Nara, donated $100 million of her own salary to expand it, now operates in 35 countries. We've provided high-speed internet and coding equipment to 847 refugee camps and underserved communities. We've identified 2,000 young people with extraordinary analytical abilities. The numbers were staggering, but what impressed the delegation more was the next slide. Those 2,000 young people have collectively filed 341 patents, Malik said, started 89 successful businesses, designed infrastructure solutions for 15 developing nations, and oh yes, they've prevented approximately $2 trillion in cybersecurity losses for our clients. $2 trillion, the German minister repeated slowly. Brilliance was always there, Nara said quietly. We just started looking for it in places people had been ignoring. The tour concluded in the original command center where everything had changed 6 years ago. It looked different now. The massive display wall still existed, but instead of showing threat alerts, it displayed real-time feeds of Harper Foundation programs around the world. Kids in Jordan learning to code, teenagers in Detroit building solar panels, young innovators in Mumbai designing water purification systems. The Zodiac Collective attack, Nara told the delegation, became a case study taught at MIT, Stanford, and Cambridge. The solution I used that night is now called the Nara Loop. It's a standard defense protocol used by banks and governments worldwide. She paused, looking at the monitors showing young faces absorbed in learning, creating, solving. But the real lesson wasn't about coding techniques. It was about where we look for intelligence. For 6 years, this facility has operated on a simple principle. Brilliance doesn't require credentials. It requires opportunity. One of the prime ministers, a man from Norway, spoke up. Ms. Al-Fayed, your success is remarkable, but surely you acknowledge that traditional education has value, that expertise comes from years of structured learning? I acknowledge that traditional education has value for people who have access to it, Nara replied. But what about the millions who don't? What about the girl coding on library computers because she's homeless? The boy teaching himself engineering from salvaged electronics because his country has no schools? Are we supposed to believe their intelligence doesn't count because they couldn't afford the right institutions? She walked to the window, looking at the desert horizon where sunset painted the sand in colors that had existed long before anyone built underground fortresses or wrote code. 6 years ago, Prince Malik believed security came from spending $400 million on technology and hiring the most expensive experts available. Then 12 hackers almost destroyed everything, not because his experts were incompetent, but because they'd all been trained to think the same way, to see the same solutions, to trust the same systems. She turned back to the delegation. One 12-year-old girl with knowledge from garbage bin manuals saw what they couldn't because she'd been trained by a different teacher. Survival, necessity, the experience of being overlooked. Malik joined her at the window. "I'll tell you what I tell every visitor who questions our methods," he said to the delegation. "I thought I needed a fortress to protect my wealth, walls, barriers, exclusivity, but that's not what protects anything. Brilliance protects you. Innovation protects you. People who can see problems from angles you've never considered." He gestured around the room at the young faces working at their stations. "And brilliance doesn't care if you're rich or poor, educated in the finest universities, or self-taught from discarded manuals, born in a palace or a refugee camp. Brilliance only cares if you're listening, if you're willing to see it, if you're brave enough to trust it when it appears in unexpected forms." The German minister was quiet for a long moment. "You're suggesting we completely rethink how we identify and develop talent?" "I'm suggesting you already have talent everywhere," Nara said. "You're just not looking for it in the right places. Every refugee camp, every underserved community, every place you've written off as a problem to be managed has people with abilities that could solve challenges you haven't even recognized yet." She pulled up a final slide, statistics that made the delegation lean forward. Last year, innovations developed by Harper Foundation participants generated $4.7 billion in economic value. Water purification systems in East Africa, renewable energy solutions in Southeast Asia, agricultural technologies in South America. None of those innovations came from traditional research institutions. They came from people who understood problems intimately because they'd lived them. "How do we replicate this?" the Norwegian Prime Minister asked. "How do we find these people in our own countries?" "Stop looking for credentials," Nara said simply. "Start looking for curiosity, for creativity under constraints, for people who've solved problems you didn't know existed. And when you find them, give them resources without trying to change them. Let them bring their perspective instead of forcing them to adopt yours." The delegation tour ended with a standing ovation in the main auditorium where 200 young technologists, the next generation of the Harper Foundation's revolution, were presenting their latest projects. Kids from Syria working alongside kids from Detroit, teenagers from Somalia collaborating with teenagers from rural Appalachia, all of them speaking the universal language of code and innovation and the shared experience of being underestimated. Malik stood in the back, watching Nara answer questions from prime ministers with the same patient clarity she'd shown explaining cooling system vulnerabilities to his panicked experts 6 years ago. She'd grown in some ways, taller, more confident in her authority, but in other ways she was exactly the same, still seeing patterns others missed, still refusing to accept that limitations had to be permanent. After the delegation left, after the presentations concluded, after the building quieted for the night, Malik found Nara in the original command center. She was sitting in the same massive chair where she'd typed 3 lines of code that changed everything. "You know what's interesting?" Malik said, settling into a chair beside her. 6 years ago, I was terrified, about to lose everything, and I got saved by someone I'd never noticed, despite her being in this building almost every night." Nara smiled. "And now you're one of the world's leading advocates for recognizing non-traditional intelligence? Funny how near-death experiences change perspective." "You changed my perspective," Malik corrected. "That night, you didn't just save my money. You saved me from being the kind of person who mistakes privilege for capability, who confuses expensive education with actual intelligence. He looked at the monitors showing Harper Foundation programs around the world, hundreds of young faces learning, creating, proving that brilliance had always been everywhere. Society had just been looking in the wrong places. Do you ever regret it? He asked, taking on this responsibility instead of just taking the money and living comfortably. Nara was quiet for a moment. Every person we've helped represents hundreds more we haven't reached yet. Every success story reminds me of thousands of others who are still invisible. So no, I don't regret it, but I do feel the weight of knowing how much more needs to change. You were 12 years old, Malik said softly. You could have just taken the $50 million, built your school and hospital, and walked away. Nobody would have blamed you. That would have helped one community, Nara replied, but it wouldn't have changed the system. It wouldn't have proven that intelligence exists everywhere. It wouldn't have forced people to question their assumptions about who deserves opportunities and why. She stood up, looking at the desert through the windows. Somewhere out there, in camps and slums and forgotten corners of the world, were the next generation of innovators, kids who would never appear on any traditional talent identification radar, kids who, like she had been, were invisible to the systems designed to find genius. 6 years ago, you asked me what I wanted, Nara said. I told you $50 million for a refugee camp. But what I really wanted, what I've always wanted, was to prove that the girl sleeping in a utility closet had value, that the boy coding on a broken phone has something to contribute. That intelligence isn't rare, recognition is rare. She turned back to Malik. We've proven it. 2,000 people, 35 countries, trillions in value created. We've proven that brilliance exists everywhere. Now we just have to convince the rest of the world to start looking. Malik nodded slowly. One person at a time, one delegation of skeptical ministers at a time, one success story at a time. Until it's not revolutionary anymore, Nara said. Until looking for intelligence in unexpected places becomes normal. Until no child with extraordinary abilities has to sleep in a utility closet hoping someone will notice. They stood together in the quiet command center, looking at the world they'd helped reshape, a world where a homeless child's knowledge from garbage bin manuals had become standard curriculum at the world's best universities, where refugee kids were protecting the financial infrastructure of nations, where being overlooked was finally being recognized as the waste it had always been. The next crisis will come, Malik said. Some new threat we haven't anticipated. And when it does, Nara replied, we'll solve it. Because we have 2,000 people who think differently, who see patterns in chaos, who understand what it means to be invisible and refuse to let anyone else disappear the way they almost did. She picked up her backpack, different than the worn one from 6 years ago, but somehow still the same, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Malik asked. Nara smiled. Home. My mother's shift ends in 20 minutes, and no matter how much the world changes, some things shouldn't. Nara changed the world because one person saw potential where others saw only poverty. Because Prince Malik Al-Fayed looked at a 12-year-old girl in worn clothes and made a choice, not to dismiss her, not to send her away, but to listen when she said she could help, to trust when she claimed she could solve what experts couldn't, to recognize that intelligence doesn't always arrive in the packages we expect. Right now in your community, there's another Nara, a brilliant child whose gift is invisible because they're wearing the wrong clothes, living in the wrong neighborhood, speaking with, the wrong accent, or surviving in circumstances that make formal education impossible. A young mind that could solve problems you haven't even imagined if someone just gave them the chance to prove what they can do. The question isn't whether these kids exist. They exist in every city, every town, every community across this planet. The question is whether you'll be the one to see them, because every day that passes without recognition, we lose innovations that could change everything. We waste potential that could transform communities. We overlook solutions to our biggest challenges because we're not looking in the right places. You can change that. Share this story. When people understand that intelligence appears everywhere, they start seeing it everywhere. They stop confusing credentials with capability. They stop assuming that poverty means lack of ability. They start recognizing that the next breakthrough might come from the kid working at the library computer because they don't have internet at home. Look differently. The next time you encounter a young person from difficult circumstances, ask yourself what they've learned the textbooks don't teach, what problems they've solved that degrees don't measure, what perspectives they carry that could reshape how you see everything. Demand better from systems, push your local schools, community programs, and institutions to recognize different types of brilliance, not just traditional academic success. Question policies that mistake privilege for merit, support programs that find intelligence in unexpected places, because somewhere in your city tonight, there's a child with the mind to unlock solutions we desperately need. Maybe they're coding on a library computer. Maybe they're teaching themselves engineering from salvaged electronics. Maybe they're solving problems you don't even know exist yet. They're waiting for someone to see them, someone to believe in them, someone like you. The girl who saved 200 billion watts was invisible until someone finally looked. Don't let the next Nara remain invisible. Share this story now.